What if the one invention meant to save humanity ended up dividing it? It all began on a stormy Thursday afternoon in early spring, the kind of day that clung to your bones and made you question every decision you'd made in the last 6 months. Grace Martin sat alone in the cluttered corner of a Brooklyn coffee shop, the screen of her aging laptop glowing with the headline she couldn't believe she'd typed, "Elon Musk's secret project may change America forever." She hesitated before hitting save, her fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard. All around her, the cafe buzzed with life, students cramming for finals, freelancers juggling deadlines, couples arguing over oat milk, but Grace was locked in a reality much larger than caffeine or conversation. She had just stumbled upon something no journalist had yet unearthed, and the implications were terrifying. A week earlier, an anonymous email with no subject line had landed in her inbox, containing only a single sentence. "If you care about the future of this country, look into Project Helix." Attached was a blurry image of a sleek black device shaped like a teardrop, embedded with a glowing blue light. The metadata showed it came from a secure SpaceX server. At first, Grace dismissed it as another online hoax, she got weird tips all the time. But something about that image, about the word helix, had lodged itself in her brain like a thorn. And now, just days later, she had connected enough dots to know she couldn't walk away from this. Elon Musk, the enigmatic billionaire behind Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, had been working on a new invention under wraps, and not even the sharpest tech insiders knew what it was. Until now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" she typed quickly, adding it to her draft before the thought slipped away. She wasn't sure why she wrote it. Maybe to feel less alone. Maybe to test if anyone else out there was paying attention. The truth was, Grace wasn't used to attention. At 32, she had built a modest reputation as a tenacious journalist with a knack for deep dives, but she was far from famous. Her days were spent navigating layers of bureaucracy, sources who ghosted, and editors who cared more about clicks than content. This story, though, this was different. This could make her career. Or destroy it. She shut her laptop and slipped it into her worn canvas bag, glancing once more at the raindrops racing down the window. Every instinct told her to run, to forget the name Helix, to go home, order takeout, and binge-watch something forgettable. But a deeper instinct told her she was on the edge of something seismic. And if she didn't act now, someone else would, or worse, no one would. She stepped into the rain without an umbrella, letting the cold slap her awake. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Grace Martin." The voice was distorted, male, possibly masked by software. "You don't know me, but we need to talk. You're not safe." The call ended before she could speak. Heart pounding, Grace ducked under an awning, scanning the street for anyone suspicious. Paranoia? Maybe. Or maybe someone was watching. Back in her apartment, an overpriced one-bedroom walk-up in Crown Heights, she triple-locked the door and drew the blinds. She opened her laptop and pulled up her research folder. It was a digital mosaic of Musk's known ventures, tech patents, leaked internal memos, and speculative think pieces. Buried in the mess was a single document labeled Helix Internal White Paper, written in cryptic technical jargon and partly redacted. From what she could decipher, Project Helix was not just a product, it was an ecosystem. A wearable neural interface capable of syncing human cognition with AI, linked to critical infrastructure, energy grids, traffic systems, healthcare databases, even personal finance networks. Musk's vision, the document implied, was to create a nationwide cognitive mesh, a collective intelligence fueled by real-time data and human input. In other words, a digital nervous system for America. Grace stared at the screen, a chill spreading across her shoulders. The potential was staggering. So was the risk. If this tech fell into the wrong hands, or if its protocols were manipulated, it could control not just information, but behavior. Influence decisions, emotions, even elections. It was power on a scale humanity had never faced. And somehow, Musk was already testing it. The document mentioned a pilot program in Texas, codenamed Echo Phase. Grace opened a browser and began searching for oddities in Texan infrastructure, power outages, strange traffic patterns, unexpected medical record updates. Within minutes, she found 3 Reddit threads from users in Austin and El Paso reporting bizarre glitches in smart home devices and wearable health tech. My fitness tracker showed a full night of sleep, I was up with insomnia all night, one wrote. Anyone else getting alerts to drink water every 15 minutes, posted another. It sounded harmless. But taken together, it smelled like a field test. Grace grabbed her phone and dialed her editor, Marcus Reed. He picked up after the 4th ring, his voice groggy. Grace, it's after 10. This better be Pulitzer-worthy. It might be, she said. I need a travel advance. I'm going to Texas. A beat of silence. Then, is this about the Musk piece? It's bigger than I thought. Much bigger. And you're sure it's not another conspiracy sinkhole? No. I have proof. Or I will soon. Marcus sighed. All right. But if you blow my budget on another wild goose chase, you're writing copy for the lifestyle section for the rest of the year. Grace smirked. Deal. She hung up and began packing a duffel bag. Essentials only, clothes, 2 burner phones, portable charger, notebooks, her press ID. She paused at the photo pinned to her fridge, her and her dad, fishing in Lake Erie when she was 9. He was gone now, a heart attack 2 years ago. But his voice stayed with her, especially in moments like this. Grace, if you see something wrong with the world, don't wait for someone else to fix it. Be the first in. She tucked the photo into her bag and zipped it shut. By dawn, she was on a flight to Austin, window seat, headphones in but no music playing. She watched the clouds shift below, her thoughts a swirl of anticipation and dread. Somewhere down there, in the wide open spaces of Texas, the future of the country was quietly taking shape. And she was going to find it, no matter what it cost. As the plane descended, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, a message. Welcome to the game, Grace. You're already late. She swallowed hard, the hum of the engine suddenly feeling much louder. Whatever was waiting for her in Texas, it had already begun. Grace didn't sleep on the plane, even though her body begged for it. The hum of the engines was hypnotic, but her mind was in overdrive. She'd been here before, chasing shadows, trying to uncover secrets powerful people would do anything to hide. But this felt different, like standing at the edge of a precipice where the wind whispered you were too late. As soon as she landed in Austin, she noticed the atmosphere felt engineered. Maybe it was the sleek, seamless infrastructure, smart buses arriving to the second, digital signs showing crowd analytics in real time, or the subtle hum of underground systems humming beneath the pavement. Everything moved too perfectly, almost rehearsed. The air even smelled filtered. It unsettled her. Grace kept her hood up as she exited the terminal, taking the express shuttle into the city under a false name she'd used before, Natalie Keene, a freelance photographer. As the shuttle curved toward downtown, her eyes locked on a massive, half-constructed building just beyond the freeway, bordered by high fences and satellite dishes. It had no signage, just mirrored windows and a perimeter patrolled by security drones that hovered silently overhead. She checked the coordinates from the metadata in the white paper and compared them on her phone. It was a perfect match. That was it. That was the Helix headquarters. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small camera fitted with an AI lens designed to detect energy signatures. Pointing it toward the building, she snapped 3 silent frames. They lit up like a Christmas tree. Whatever they were building, it wasn't just another data center. Grace checked into a cheap but clean motel on South Lamar, using her alias. She paid in cash and requested a room without smart locks or digital keypads. The old woman at the desk barely looked up. Once inside, Grace sealed the curtains and turned off her phone. Her burner would have to do from now on. She laid out her notes on the small wooden desk, snippets of code, stills from the live stream where Musk teased a new age of cognitive democracy, and handwritten questions she had been building for days. Chief among them, what was Helix really for? Who was it meant to benefit? And why the secrecy? She opened her laptop and opened the secure chat she'd set up with Ravi. He hadn't responded since her message yesterday, but she knew he'd show. He always did. She had met Ravi Malhotra 2 years ago when she was researching a piece on data privacy and smart cars. He was a former Neuralink engineer turned whistleblower with a quiet demeanor and brilliant mind. Since then, they'd exchanged tips, leaks, and plenty of arguments over ethics versus innovation. Ravi finally pinged, "You're here." She replied, "I saw the compound." "They're testing already, aren't they?" Pause. "Yes. Echo Phase is live in a 20-mile radius. People are wearing the first-gen Helix units without knowing what they really do." "And," she typed. "It's worse than you think," he said. "They've integrated biometric suggestion loops. The device doesn't just read, it nudges." Defined nudge. Your mood, your choices. Imagine walking into a store, and without realizing it, your dopamine spikes just enough to make you choose brand A instead of brand B. Now apply that to politics, medicine, law enforcement. Grace stared at the screen. This wasn't just about convenience. It was influence engineering. "Where are you?" she typed. "Close," he replied. "I'll meet you tomorrow. But be careful. They know you're here." She felt her stomach twist. Not even 24 hours in and she was already compromised. She powered down everything and tried to sleep, but every creak of the motel's thin walls made her jump. In the dark, she thought about her dad again. He'd been a mechanic, not a tech guy, but he'd taught her something that stuck: if a machine was too quiet, it meant something was off. She was starting to feel that way about this whole city. The next morning, she dressed like a local, jeans, hoodie, baseball cap, and made her way to a little cafe in East Austin where she and Ravi had agreed to meet. It was early and mostly empty, save for a few remote workers buried in laptops. She ordered coffee and sat near the back, facing the door. Ravi arrived 10 minutes later, looking thinner than she remembered, with bags under his eyes and a laptop case slung over his shoulder. "You look terrible," she whispered. "So do you," he replied, sliding into the seat across from her. Without pleasantries, he pulled out a hard drive. "Everything I could get without tripping internal alarms. Design schematics, behavior analysis reports, and user testing data from the pilot group." "Are they aware they're being tested?" Grace asked. Ravi shook his head. "They think it's a new fitness tracker. But the Helix band monitors EEG patterns, vocal tone, pupil dilation, even microexpressions. It creates a psychological profile and then feeds stimuli through haptic pulses or auditory cues. It can make you feel anxious, calm, confident, or afraid." Jesus! It's not just data mining. It's behavioral conditioning. Grace opened the files, scanning through one marked, Emotional Feedback Loop, Case Study Number 006. A subject named Mary, 42, began experiencing recurring dreams after wearing Helix for 2 weeks. Another file noted a spike in community engagement and positive sentiment in one test neighborhood, after users were exposed to synchronized audio prompts during sleep. "Subliminal programming?" she asked. Ravi nodded. "Beta version. Limited range now, but scalable. The goal is to integrate with emergency broadcasts and local communication systems. They call it adaptive governance." Does Musk know? He doesn't just know. He designed the architecture. He believes he's saving the country, creating a rational democracy free of bias. But he's creating the blueprint for thought control. How soon until nationwide rollout? Ravi looked around nervously. They say 6 months. But they'll accelerate if the trial data stays clean. There's a media event next week. A controlled reveal. Grace sat back, letting it sink in. We need to leak this. Already tried, Ravi said. I sent parts to 3 journalists. One vanished. Another recanted. The third said his editor killed the story. Grace felt a surge of anger. Then we go wide. I'll publish everything. You'll be targeted. You already are. She nodded. But if we don't, no one will. He slid her another drive. This has internal comms from SpaceX and Neuralink. The project has friends in the Department of Energy, Defense, even Education. They want to integrate Helix into schools. Under the banner of performance enhancement. Grace's heart pounded. We're looking at the quiet birth of a technocratic state. Worse, Ravi said. A state that feels like your idea. They left separately. Grace returned to her motel, heart still racing. She now had everything she needed to blow the story open. But it wouldn't matter if no one believed her. Or worse, if everyone wanted it to be true. That night, as she prepared her notes, her burner phone buzzed again. This time it was a video. She opened it cautiously. The footage showed her arriving at the cafe that morning. Then inside, talking to Ravi. A voice over the video said, "You have one chance to walk away." No name. No face. Just a warning. She forwarded the video to Marcus. His reply was instant, "You've kicked the hornet's nest. We're all in now." Grace stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her laptop. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked older, heavier with knowledge. And determined. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a war for the future of free will. The next morning began with silence so thick it felt like the city was holding its breath. Grace lay still in the creaky motel bed, eyes wide open, staring at the water-stained ceiling as the early sun cast pale light through the blinds. Her mind replayed the video from the night before in a relentless loop, her image, her conversation, the voice saying she had one chance to walk away. Someone was watching her, close enough to capture the footage without her noticing. That meant drones, or worse, people on foot. She rolled over and grabbed the burner phone, checking for any new messages. Nothing. Her editor Marcus hadn't replied again, and Ravi had gone quiet. She felt a pit in her stomach grow heavier by the second. She moved through the room with practiced care, sweeping for bugs or anything that felt off. The door had a subtle scratch near the lock that hadn't been there before. The closet door sat slightly ajar even though she had closed it the night before. Her motel room had been entered. Grace didn't scream or panic. She went cold. Calm. Her father had taught her to read pressure like a system overheating, too much panic and you missed the warning signs. She packed quickly, stuffing the hard drives into the lining of her coat, hiding one inside her toiletry bag, and tucking the backup SD card into her shoe. With her bag slung over her shoulder and the burner phone powered off, she left the motel without checking out. She took a city bike and rode hard toward the university campus, blending in with the morning rush of students. She had no intention of hiding now. She had work to do, and she needed a place to do it fast. On the 3rd floor of a public library near UT Austin, she found a quiet corner surrounded by books no one had touched in years. She plugged into an ancient desktop terminal, bypassed the city's login with a throwaway Linux USB key, and started dumping data from the hard drives Ravi had given her. As the files transferred, she took in the names and headers, neurosync prototype schematics, behavior loop simulations, government correspondence, public phase expansion planning, and descent risk analysis. That last one caught her eye. She opened the PDF, and her breath caught in her throat. Her name was on the list. Along with Ravi's. And others, journalists, academics, politicians. Each name had a probability rating next to it, a percentage for whether the person would oppose Project Helix and how influential their opposition could become. Grace Martin, 84%. High risk. Containment advised. The document didn't say what containment meant, but her gut told her it wasn't just metaphorical. She felt something icy wrap around her chest. She printed 2 pages and stuffed them into her jacket. A security guard glanced her way from across the floor, and she realized she'd been staring at the screen too long. She logged out, wiped the USB, and walked briskly out of the library into the boiling Texas sun. Her next move was clear. She needed someone bigger than her, someone with reach, someone who couldn't be silenced so easily. She called Sam. Samantha Ellis had been her best friend since freshman year at Columbia. Now a high-profile tech correspondent for a major national network, Sam had the kind of platform Grace didn't. She also had contacts, legal backup, and protection. Sam answered after 2 rings. Grace? I was just about to call you. Are you okay? Not even a little, Grace said. Listen, I need to see you. Now. It's Helix. It's so much worse than we thought. Where are you? Austin. Heading to you. Can you meet me at the airport in 4 hours? Booked. I'll be there. Grace hung up and grabbed a rideshare to the airport using a clean account. She ditched her old bag in a random trash bin near the terminal and switched to her backup duffel. At the gate, she kept her head low, eyes scanning for anyone lingering too long nearby. She boarded early, found her seat near the back, and wrapped her coat tightly around her shoulders. As the plane lifted off, she allowed herself a few moments of relief, staring out the window as the sprawl of Texas shrank below her. But she knew the danger hadn't passed, it was only beginning. The minute she landed in New York, Sam was waiting at arrivals, arms crossed and sunglasses on, looking both annoyed and scared. You look like hell, she said, pulling Grace into a hug. I feel worse. They drove in silence to Sam's apartment, a sleek penthouse in Tribeca with soundproof walls and a secured elevator. Grace had always made fun of it, but right now, it felt like a fortress. Inside, Sam poured them both strong coffee and waited. Grace dropped the flash drive onto the counter. Everything you need is in there. If I disappear, stop. If I do, Grace continued, you publish it. Everywhere. Even if it means going to war with half of Silicon Valley. Sam nodded, jaw tight. Show me. They spent hours poring through the files together. Sam's face darkened as she read through test cases, internal memos, and influence protocols. She paused at a video showing a test subject being exposed to audio cues through their Helix band, then altering their answers in a political survey afterward without realizing it. This is mind control, Sam whispered. Not total. Not yet, Grace said. But soon. They uploaded the data to a secure cloud, added multiple layers of encryption, and prepared 2 separate press kits, one for Sam's editor, and one for trusted legal counsel. Grace drafted a timeline, her hands shaking as she realized the scale of the story now spreading in front of them. And that's when Sam's phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message. Just a video. It was Grace again, this time outside Sam's building. Shot from across the street. The caption said, "Last warning. How the hell are they still tracking you?" Sam asked, panic rising. Grace ran her hands through her hair. Facial recognition, probably. Traffic cameras. Maybe even Helix beta units tracking geolocation by proximity. We need to go dark. Completely. I can't, Grace said. I need to go to DC. If this thing's being rolled out nationally, someone in Congress has to know. I need a source on the inside. Sam stood up. Then I'm coming with you. Grace shook her head. You can't. If they see you too close to me, you'll lose your job. You're more useful with a platform intact. Screw my platform. No, Grace said firmly. We divide and stay alive. I'll go to DC. You prep the story. We drop it together in 48 hours. Sam finally nodded, reluctantly. But if I don't hear from you, release everything. Grace left with a burner in her pocket, a hoodie over her head, and a ticket on a midnight train to the nation's capital. The darkness outside the train windows offered no comfort. Just reflections of her own tired eyes and the knowledge that if she failed, America wouldn't know it had already been rewired. She closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, a man in a suit was sitting across from her. She hadn't seen him bored. He looked up from his tablet, nodded politely, then leaned in slightly. Miss Martin, isn't it? Her blood froze. Do I know you? Not yet. But we should talk. Before you make things worse for everyone. Who are you? Let's just say, he replied smoothly, I'm part of the safety net. And you're about to poke a hole in it. She stood. I'm not talking to you. That's unfortunate, he said, not moving. Because the future's already in motion. And if you step in front of it, you won't stop it. You'll just get run over. Grace didn't speak. She stood there frozen, staring at the man across from her, his calm demeanor a direct contradiction to the alarm bells exploding in her chest. He wore a dark blue suit with no visible badge, no name tag, and no signs of where he came from. His eyes were sharp but not unkind, like someone used to being obeyed, not questioned. She didn't move, and neither did he. The rhythm of the train rumbled under their feet, humming through the silence that stretched between them. You're making a mistake, he said finally, his voice level, almost bored. This doesn't end the way you think it does. Grace narrowed her eyes. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you clarity. You have no idea what's at stake. Helix isn't just a device. It's infrastructure. It's security. It's peace. You think exposing it will earn you glory. What you'll really do is create panic, unrest, maybe even bloodshed. That's the outcome your truth creates. Grace felt her fingers clench into fists. You want me to believe that total psychological control is peace? He tilted his head, slightly amused. You say control, we say calibration. We've calibrated everything else, electricity, water, air traffic. Why not thought? Especially if it means people live better lives. You mean quieter lives, she snapped. Lives that serve your agenda. No, he said. Lives that don't burn everything down. You think chaos is freedom. But the real world isn't built to survive chaos anymore. Not with this population, this climate, this pressure. Helix is the next step. A necessary evolution. Musk didn't create a weapon. He created a path forward. A path for who? Grace asked. The people or the people in charge? The man smiled, almost with pity. There's no difference anymore. The words hit her like a slap. He stood slowly and picked up his tablet. You've been warned. No one will stop you, Grace. That's the beauty of a free country. But we'll be ready when your story drops. And the world will thank us when they choose Helix anyway. He walked past her, calm as ever, disappearing into the corridor between train cars. She didn't follow. She sat down, her knees trembling, the weight of his words digging deeper into her spine with every passing second. Was he bluffing? Or was he telling the truth, that even if she exposed everything, people would still line up to put the device on their bodies and let it whisper to their thoughts? She stared out the window into the darkness of the East Coast countryside, miles of invisible wires humming beneath the earth, satellites blinking above in perfect silence, and somewhere between them, a network being born that no one voted for but everyone would soon obey. She reached into her coat, pulled out her backup phone, and typed a single sentence to Sam. He warned me again. But we go live in 36. Sam replied instantly, already prepping the headline. Be safe. Grace arrived in D.C. just before dawn, stepping off the train into a city still half asleep, its monument standing watch in the dim morning light. She took a cab to a safe house address Ravi had given her, a tiny, windowless studio apartment rented under a fake name. Inside, it smelled like dust and old plaster, but it had a working router and no smart tech. She pulled out her laptop, connected to the secure drive, and began organizing the files by category. Internal communications. Behavioral experiments. Government buy-in. The document that terrified her most wasn't the technical ones, it was the PowerPoint presentation titled Helix Integration, a New Social Contract. It outlined a 10-year plan in which Helix would become the backbone of education, employment, health care, and civic engagement. Children would wear it in schools as early as 3rd grade. Adults would earn Clarity credits for consistent cognitive compliance, reduced stress, high productivity, stable emotional patterns. Those who resisted, their data would be flagged as erratic. They'd be denied promotions. Excluded from certain services. Not punished, just omitted. Forgotten. Grace closed the file and exhaled, a strange mix of horror and disbelief settling over her like ash. This was real. This wasn't science fiction. She took a deep breath and pulled up a new draft in her word processor. She titled it, The Lie of Clarity. How Elon Musk's Helix project could redefine freedom in America. She began typing, pouring out everything she had seen and learned, her fingers moving with the urgency of someone writing a will before the ship goes under. She included timestamps, direct quotes from engineers, data visualizations, and anonymized case studies. She backed it up to 3 cloud vaults. She encrypted it twice. She sent one copy to Sam. Then she left. Her destination was Capitol Hill, where she had one last hope, Congresswoman Elaine Wexler, a longtime advocate for digital rights and data privacy. They had spoken once, years ago, when Grace had written an exposé on illegal facial recognition programs used in city subways. Wexler had quoted her in a public hearing. If anyone in government would listen now, it was her. Grace entered through the public access side and joined a tour group. At the appropriate moment, she slipped away and found her way to Wexler's office. A young aide tried to stop her, but Grace flashed her press ID and whispered just loud enough, "Tell her it's Grace Martin. Tell her it's about Helix. She'll know." The aide disappeared, and 2 minutes later, Grace was ushered into a corner office with tall windows and the Capitol dome framed perfectly in the background. Wexler looked tired, but sharp. "I don't usually do ambushes," she said. "But you look like hell." "I am hell," Grace said. "You need to see this." She handed her the flash drive. Wexler inserted it into her secure terminal, her face remaining unreadable as she clicked through files, one by one. After 10 minutes, she turned to Grace. "I've heard whispers. But this is a roadmap to digital authoritarianism." "It's already begun," Grace said. "They're testing in Texas. They're influencing decisions without consent." "You need to publish this immediately," Wexler said, her voice low but urgent, eyes still scanning the drive's contents as if searching for any detail she might have missed. "This isn't just policy-level dangerous, this is constitutional. If what you've shown me is accurate, Helix is a Trojan horse." Grace nodded, exhaustion pressing hard behind her eyes. "I know. And I'm going to publish it. But I needed someone on the inside. Someone who can keep this from getting buried or discredited the second it hits." Wexler leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "Musk's reach is long. And he's got defenders in both parties because of what he's done for electric vehicles, the space program, energy infrastructure, you name it. He's a national symbol now, not just a businessman. If you go public with this, you're not just exposing tech corruption. You're turning a huge portion of the country against their idea of progress. Grace held her ground. Then they're chasing the wrong future. If Helix becomes the backbone of American life, there won't be any free will left to fight for. We won't even remember what freedom was. Just compliance disguised as comfort. Wexler closed the laptop slowly, then turned to her aide. Get me a private call with the subcommittee on technology oversight. No recordings, no transcripts. I want to brief them in person. Clear the afternoon. The aide rushed out. Wexler faced Grace again. You'll have a narrow window, hours, maybe a day, before they try to spin this or shut it down entirely. Once it goes live, you'll be hunted. Legally or otherwise. Grace gave a grim smile. I already am. Where's your backup? Wexler asked. A friend in New York, Grace said. She's sitting on mirrored data and ready to drop it across several platforms the minute I give the word. Wexler nodded. Good. But don't underestimate what you're up against. Helix isn't just a product. It's a worldview. And Musk is selling it as the cure for the chaos everyone's afraid of. When people are afraid, they'll accept anything that promises to protect them, even if it costs their autonomy. Grace stood to leave. I appreciate your help. Truly. Grace, Wexler said before she reached the door. Don't get caught. There are people, powerful people, who want this buried so badly they'll dig your grave themselves. Grace stepped out into the marble corridor and took the back exit, her heartbeat thumping like a war drum. She didn't head straight back to her safe house. Instead, she ducked into a quiet co-working space 2 blocks away, paid in cash under an alias, and set up shop at a private workstation. She plugged in the second copy of her report, opened the media kit she and Sam had built, and made final edits. She gave the story a new title, something more immediate, more visceral. Inside Elon Musk's Helix, the mind control tech set to rewrite American freedom. She uploaded a teaser video, blurred faces, scrolling code, a voiceover clip from a Helix internal meeting stating, once the sync threshold is reached, compliance becomes subconscious. She captioned it, you've heard of Neuralink. You've heard of Tesla. But you haven't heard of this. Because they don't want you to. Within minutes, the teaser began to trend on anonymous forums. Thousands of users began asking what Helix was. Grace set the drop time, 6 p.m. Eastern. She messaged Sam, the match is lit. Get ready. Sam replied with a flame emoji. Grace left the co-working space, her hood pulled low, eyes scanning every person who passed. She felt eyes on her constantly now, even if they weren't there. She walked 5 blocks, took a metro train to another part of the city, then caught a rideshare to a decoy location. She didn't go home. She didn't go anywhere with a pattern. At 5:57 p.m., she opened her burner phone and sent one final message, drop. At exactly 6 p.m., Sam published the full exposé. Within seconds, it was mirrored across news outlets, whistleblower sites, independent blogs, and a handful of high-traffic subreddits. Grace watched it unfold from a hidden cafe booth. First came disbelief. Fake news. Deep fake. This is just more Elon hate. Then came the documents. Screenshots. Videos. User testimonials. Internal memos with Musk's initials. People began to dig, verify, confirm. A former Neuralink employee anonymously confirmed the behavioral conditioning tests. A local journalist in Texas posted photos of unmarked vans delivering Helix prototypes to community centers in Austin. A video surfaced of a woman describing how her 9-year-old school had handed out focus bands that looked identical to early Helix designs. By 6:45 p.m. #Helix leak was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. By 7:15, the White House released a vague statement promising to review any concerning developments in emerging technology. By 8:30, Elon Musk himself tweeted, "Innovation always scares the weak. #Helix will change everything. We're just getting started." At 9:10 p.m., Grace received a photo on her private device. It showed her, sitting in the cafe booth, taken just moments earlier. No message. No signature. Just a picture. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed her things and ran. She turned onto a back alley, ducked through a side street, found a door that led into a laundry room, and crouched behind a row of machines as her mind raced. Someone had been that close. In that cafe. Watching her in real time. But they hadn't approached. That meant they didn't want to kill her. Not yet. They wanted her to see them. To know that no matter how far she ran, they were 2 steps behind. Her burner phone buzzed. Another message. It read, "You should have walked away." She smashed the phone against the floor. She was done being watched. She was done running. She stood, took a deep breath, and left the building through the back exit. This time, she didn't go silent. She messaged Sam from a new device, "It's working. They're scared. Keep pushing." Sam responded, "You're all over the networks. Major anchors are calling Helix the next prism. The Senate wants hearings. And you, my friend, are officially trending on every major platform." Grace made her way to a contact's apartment, an investigative reporter in hiding after blowing the lid off a military contracting scandal. He let her crash in his guest room, gave her a new burner, and made her promise not to go near windows. That night, she sat in the dark with only the glow of the phone screen lighting her face, watching as the world reacted to her story. Protesters gathered outside Tesla showrooms. Senators issued public statements demanding Musk testify before Congress. Parents started pulling their kids out of schools that had adopted early Helix devices. But just as quickly, countermessages appeared. Videos showing happy Helix users claiming their lives had improved. Bots flooded the comments with hashtags like #CognitiveFreedom and #BetterWithHelix. An op-ed in a major newspaper accused Grace of paranoid journalism. She saw it for what it was, a full-blown information war. And it was only just beginning. Around midnight, Sam messaged again, "You're going to be asked to testify. Elaine Wexler's calling for emergency oversight hearings. They want you in D.C. next week." Grace leaned her head against the cold wall. She was so tired. But also wide awake. She had always believed journalism was about uncovering truth. She never expected that truth would become ammunition. Or that she would become a symbol. But here she was. The woman who took on Elon Musk. The woman who exposed the technology designed to rewire America. The woman now living with a target on her back. And somehow, she knew, this was just the beginning. The hearing room was already at capacity an hour before it began, the air thick with tension, cameras, and the quiet murmuring of press and staffers who could all sense that history was about to shift. Grace sat in the witness holding area, staring down at the prepared testimony on her lap, trying to silence the thudding pulse in her ears. Outside, crowds had gathered along Constitution Avenue, some waving signs that said, "No mind control," and "Stop Helix now," others with slogans like, "Trust Elon," and "Upgrade Humanity." The divide had been growing online, but here in D.C., it was physically manifesting, a cultural fault line cleaving down the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Congresswoman Elaine Wexler walked in briskly, gave Grace a brief nod of solidarity, then disappeared into the chamber where the Subcommittee on Technology Oversight was taking their seats. Grace inhaled slowly. She was no stranger to the pressure of live interviews or hard-hitting investigative panels, but this was different. This wasn't about clicks or traffic. This was about truth versus power, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure which side had more weight. A security officer opened the door and motioned her forward. Grace stood, clutching her folder, and stepped into the lion's den. Every seat in the chamber was filled. Multiple networks were broadcasting live. Even international media outlets had sent correspondents. At the center of it all sat the panel, 12 senators and representatives, each with their own agenda, reputation, and re-election clock ticking away in their heads. Ms. Grace Martin, the chairwoman began, "You are here voluntarily to testify on the deployment, ethics, and oversight of the Helix Neural Synchronization Project, commonly referred to as Helix. Your credentials and evidence have been submitted for review. Please proceed with your opening statement." Grace nodded, placed her hands on the table to steady them, and began. "My name is Grace Martin. I'm an investigative journalist and editor. Over the past several months, I've gathered internal documents, whistleblower testimony, and first-hand footage confirming the covert deployment of Helix, a neurological interface developed under the direction of Elon Musk and his affiliated companies. While publicly promoted as a cognitive enhancement and productivity tool, my investigation reveals a far more insidious reality. Helix operates as a subtle behavioral modification system capable of influencing emotion, opinion, and decision-making in ways that are neither disclosed nor regulated. It has already been distributed across test populations without informed consent, and its developers have internal documentation describing it as the cornerstone of a new social contract based on neurological compliance. What we're talking about is not just a device. It is a tool for mass psychological governance. And if allowed to continue unchecked, it will transform the very foundation of American autonomy." The silence that followed was dense and deliberate. The chairwoman thanked her and opened the floor for questions. A skeptical senator from California leaned forward first. "Ms. Martin, are you aware that Mr. Musk has categorically denied your claims and labeled your report as deeply flawed and fear-driven?" Grace met his eyes. "I'm aware he denied them. I'm also aware that every document I published has since been verified by multiple independent cybersecurity experts, and that whistleblowers from inside the Helix project have confirmed key aspects of the technology's behavioral influence capacity. Denial is not disproof." Another senator, younger and more tech-savvy, tapped a pen against his notes. "Let's talk about the technology itself. You claim Helix uses neural entrainment to influence behavior. How, exactly?" Grace answered without hesitating. "Helix monitors real-time EEG feedback and then emits synchronized audio and haptic signals that subtly reinforce or discourage specific neural patterns, essentially rewarding compliance and dulling resistance. Over time, users become more likely to exhibit behavior deemed productive or stable by the system's algorithmic benchmarks." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. The senator continued. "So we're not talking about forced mind control. We're talking about gradual behavioral conditioning, correct?" "Conditioning without knowledge or consent," Grace clarified. "That distinction is critical. Users believe they are using a productivity tool. They are not told they are being neurologically shaped toward predetermined outcomes." The next question came from a representative from Ohio. "Is there any evidence of federal involvement or funding in Helix's development?" Grace nodded. "Yes. I've submitted documents indicating multiple grants, DARPA-adjacent research contracts, and quiet cooperation from certain Department of Education pilots for cognitive assessment in schools. The federal government has not only been aware of Helix, they facilitated its deployment in test regions." Audible murmurs surged. One of the more hawkish senators leaned in, voice sharp. "You're accusing this government of participating in neurological manipulation of its own citizens?" "Not all of the government," Grace said calmly. "But enough to matter." The chairwoman stepped in. "Let's remain focused. Ms. Martin, is it your belief that Helix is a national security threat?" Grace didn't flinch. Yes. Not because it's foreign, but because it's unchecked. A system that can influence the way Americans think, vote, and act, without their awareness, is a threat to every democratic institution we have. That statement hung in the air like smoke. The chairwoman called a recess to deliberate. Grace stepped out into the hallway, a dozen reporters shouting questions as she passed. She said nothing. Not yet. Her phone buzzed. It was Sam. "You killed it," the message read. "CNN wants you on live tonight. MSNBC's calling you the new Snowden with lipstick." Grace rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. The smile faded when she saw the next message. "FYI, Musk just posted a video response." Grace opened the link. Musk sat in a dimly lit room, no background, just him and the camera. "There's been a lot of noise," he began, "about Helix. About fear. About control. But here's the truth, every technology we've ever created has reshaped us. Cars reshaped how we see distance. The internet reshaped how we see knowledge. Helix will reshape how we see ourselves. Yes, it influences cognition. That's the point. Depression, anxiety, impulsivity, these aren't virtues. They're malfunctions. Helix is a patch. A repair. Grace Martin wants you to fear it. She wants you to believe the human mind should remain flawed forever. I disagree. The video ended. Millions had already watched it. Thousands of comments beneath it praised Musk as a visionary. Others accused him of engineering digital fascism. Grace felt the weight of it closing in. The lines had been drawn. There would be no middle ground. That night, she sat in a green room waiting to go on live television. The anchor leaned in before the segment and said, "You know, this interview might get you blacklisted from every tech event for the next 10 years. Grace smiled wearily. "That's fine. I never liked the hors d'oeuvres anyway." When the cameras rolled, she stared straight into the lens and said, "This isn't about hating Elon Musk. It's about loving the truth. We are at a crossroads. One path leads to a future of voluntary manipulation sold as convenience. The other leads to something harder, freedom with uncertainty. I don't know what choice people will make. But at least now they'll be making it with open eyes." That quote would be replayed 1,000 times in the days that followed. On TikTok, it became an anthem. On cable news, a battleground. In classrooms, a debate prompt. The world wasn't asleep anymore. But whether it was truly awake, or just dreaming differently, remained to be seen. The morning after Grace's testimony, the streets of Washington were on edge. You could feel it in the way pedestrians hurried across intersections with heads down, in the way Capitol Police stood too deep at every entrance, in the way news vans clustered like vultures outside government buildings. Inside Grace's borrowed apartment, she sat in silence, wrapped in a blanket, the TV on mute, watching analysts tear apart every sentence she'd spoken in the hearing. Some called her a hero. Others called her a hysteric. A few suggested she was part of an orchestrated political attack to undermine one of the most powerful private citizens in American history. But the coverage didn't stop. The video of her testifying had surpassed 120 million views across platforms. Her phrase, "conditioning without consent," was now a rallying cry across college campuses, protest groups, and podcasts. She turned the TV off and checked her encrypted chat with Sam. "Status," she typed. The response came in seconds, trending in 48 states. Europe's picking it up too. BBC's doing a piece. Musk is going quiet for now. No public statements in 18 hours. Internal memo from X says to avoid all Helix-related content. Grace allowed herself a sliver of hope. Maybe they had hit the tipping point. Maybe the world really was listening. Just as she typed her reply, her burner phone buzzed. A private signal, Ravi. She picked up, heart racing. "They're moving it," he said immediately. "The source nodes. They're being relocated from Texas and Colorado to undisclosed locations. They're trying to bury it." "Do you know where?" "Not yet. But they've started deleting cloud logs. Anything that ties back to Neuralink or the early Helix firmware. They're calling it a cleanup." Grace rubbed her temple. "Which means they're expecting accountability. Or worse, they're preparing to go dark and relaunch later." Ravi continued, "They're 2 steps ahead. Always have been. But there's one thread left." "What is it?" "Prototype units. V1S. They were given to early adopters for wellness trials, rich clients, tech influencers, people in Musk's circle. If we can get one, we can analyze the firmware. Show the embedded compliance algorithms. It's physical proof." Grace felt the gravity of it. "How many units?" "Less than 200. I tracked one to a man named Bennett Hallstrom in Palo Alto. Venture capitalist. Huge early investor in Neuralink and Tesla. He wears his Helix everywhere. Claims it helped him overcome PTSD. But I've heard chatter, his behavior's changed dramatically in recent months. Almost cult-like. Do we have access?" "Not yet. But I've got a contact inside his wellness clinic. She's willing to help. If you can get to her." Grace didn't hesitate. "Send me the info. I'll go." Within the hour, she was on a private charter funded by an anonymous donor aligned with Wexler's office, heading west toward Silicon Valley. As the jet cut through the clouds, Grace stared out the window, wondering how many other flights were in the air at that moment: corporate jets, government planes, cargo drones, all part of an invisible web powered by code, data, and influence. She'd spent her entire career believing that information was the most powerful tool on Earth. But now she wasn't so sure. Maybe it wasn't information that shaped the world, but belief. And Helix wasn't feeding data. It was feeding belief. In Palo Alto, the sun was warm and the sidewalks were lined with Teslas, e-bikes, and palm trees. Grace moved through the city like a ghost, wearing dark glasses and a hat, blending in with the thousands of entrepreneurs and freelancers who made coffee shops their offices. The wellness clinic was a glass and steel cube nestled between 2 biotech firms. Discreet, expensive, and exclusive. She met the contact, Lena, at a juice bar 2 blocks away. Lena was in her early 30s, dressed in clinical whites, with tired eyes and quick, nervous glances. "He comes in 3 times a week," she said. "Always alone. Doesn't talk much anymore. Just gets his neural recalibration and leaves." "Is it possible to access his unit?" Grace asked. "Only if he removes it, which he never does. But there's something else. His Helix was recently updated remotely. But the patch came from an unlisted server. Not Tesla. Not Neuralink. I think they're testing something even deeper. Can you download the update?" "Not from here. But I can clone the signal if I'm within 10 feet of the device. I just need a receiver." Grace handed her a micro drive. "Will this work?" Lena examined it and nodded. "If I'm caught, I'll lose everything." "If we don't stop this," Grace said, "we all lose everything." The plan was simple. Lena would initiate a calibration scan, standing close enough to clone the update package. Grace would wait nearby, watching for extraction. The next day, it happened. Hallstrom arrived in a black Tesla Model S, stepped out in a hoodie and jeans, and walked in without speaking to anyone. His Helix band glowed faintly blue on his temple, sleek, silent, dangerous. Lena greeted him like normal. Grace watched from a tinted window across the street, heart pounding. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then Lena emerged, texting a single emoji, brain. She had it. They met behind the building, where Lena handed over the receiver and pulled her hood tight against the wind. "Be careful," she whispered. "He's not alone. He's being watched." "I know," Grace replied. She flew back the next morning and delivered the drive to a cybersecurity team in D.C. working under congressional protection. The moment they cracked it open, they gasped. Embedded in the update was a new module labeled only Intune, a suite of scripts designed to detect emotional spikes and neutralize them using synchronized neural rhythms. In simple terms, if you got angry at the wrong person or idea, the device would calm you down. If you got too sad, too rebellious, too unpredictable, it would flatten the curve. "It's not just conditioning anymore," one of the analysts whispered. "It's emotional suppression. This is next level." Grace stepped back, letting the weight of that settle in. It was one thing to manipulate behavior through subtle reinforcement. But this was about shaping inner reality. Muting the very feelings that made resistance possible. She uploaded a new piece that night, The Silence Machine, How Helix's latest update could erase dissent before you feel it. It exploded. Again. This time, not just on social media but in the streets. In San Francisco, protesters marched through downtown wearing foil hats and chanting, "Feel everything." In Atlanta, a group of college students hacked a billboard to display a 3D model of Helix with the words, "Warning, your mind is not a product." Wexler called an emergency press conference. The president issued a statement of grave concern. Musk remained silent. But his companies began scrubbing Helix branding from websites. Tesla denied involvement. Neuralink claimed it was exploring ethical frameworks and would pause all human-facing applications. Grace sat alone that night, watching the tide shift. Maybe this was it. Maybe truth had won. But even as she hoped, she feared. Because Helix was just the beginning. And somewhere deep in the digital spine of America, someone was already building the next evolution. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Grace woke to a low-frequency buzzing in her ears, like static without a source, the kind that wasn't coming from outside but from somewhere deep inside her skull. She blinked hard, sat up, and checked her surroundings. The D.C. safe house, still intact, no signs of entry, the reinforced windows holding, the blackout curtains drawn. But something was off. Her laptop was glowing, screen still on from the night before. She hadn't left it on. Cautiously, she approached and saw that it had rebooted, logged her out, then logged her back in. Her encryption protocols were still active, no data breach alerts, no files missing. But someone had been in the system. She opened the most recent log file. 3 minutes of remote access, executed by an unknown signature trace routed through 11 global servers. Whoever it was had touched nothing. They just looked. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, mind calculating possibilities. Was it Musk's people? A government third party? Someone else entirely? The access window was small, almost surgical. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to steal. They'd come to study. She backed everything up again, double encrypted it, and messaged Sam on a new secure thread, "We've been scoped. No breach, but they're watching again." Sam's reply came quickly, "Stay mobile. Drop the house. I'll reroute your base. We've got a donor in Vermont, private land, secure line. You'll be off-grid but wired." Grace didn't hesitate. She packed her essentials, drives, notes, her burner phones, and left within the hour. The drive out of D.C. was long, quiet, and sobering. Billboards once selling Tesla models were now plastered with graffiti, "Obey," scrawled across glowing car faces, a Helix band spray-painted on Abraham Lincoln's forehead. The divide was widening across America. Those who wanted the clarity Helix promised, efficiency, peace, emotional balance, and those who saw it for what it really was, obedience masquerading as evolution. In Vermont, the donor's property sat atop a ridge of evergreens, snow still crusting the ground even in early spring. The house was old but wired with discrete satellite tech, solar-powered, and entirely self-contained. Grace arrived and exhaled for the first time in days. She connected to the secure network and received her first surprise. A new message from Ravi. But not a voice or text. A video. The file was labeled, "For your eyes only." She opened it. Ravi appeared on screen, gaunt, eyes red-rimmed, hair disheveled like he hadn't slept in days. "Grace," he began, his voice hoarse. "This is my insurance policy. If you're seeing this, it means I've gone dark, by choice or by force. Either way, you need to know the next part. Helix wasn't built in a vacuum. There's a subsidiary, Arcadia Systems. Publicly it's a behavioral analytics company. Privately, it's a shadow lab for neural mesh experiments. It's where the original control scripts were developed. And it's where the newest prototype is being tested. It's not wearable. It's injectable. A neural patch, like a digital stem cell, that syncs directly with the brain's reward center. Permanent. Undetectable. And irreversible. It's called Iris. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. The video continued. They've already begun trials. 10 subjects in closed testing environments. They claim it's the solution to cognitive instability. But what they're really doing is removing friction. Every conflicting thought, every impulse to resist or question, that's friction. Iris smooths it out. You don't know you've changed. You just feel more agreeable. Like things finally make sense. Like the world isn't so noisy anymore. That's how they get you. Not with fear. With peace. Ravi looked straight into the camera. You have to find the site. The main lab is in Utah, buried under a decoy mining operation. I've attached coordinates. You won't be able to get in alone. But I know someone who can help. His name is Elias Crane. Former white hat hacker turned ghost. He owes me. I told him you'd be calling. The video ended with an audio file, Elias's contact information, scrambled through an audio cipher Grace decrypted using Ravi's algorithm. She memorized the number and destroyed the clip. Then she made the call. Elias answered after 3 rings, his voice low and wary. Who gave you this number? Ravi, Grace said. He said you'd help me get into Arcadia. Silence. Then, if Ravi's gone, this is bigger than I thought. You know what you're asking, right? Arcadia isn't a building. It's a fortress. Then help me breach the walls. Another pause. Then, send me your location. I'll be there in 24 hours. Bring everything. Grace barely slept. She spent the night reviewing every file she had on Helix, Arcadia, and Iris, cross-referencing coordinates with known drone traffic patterns and military no-fly zones. At dawn, a black SUV pulled into the gravel drive. A tall man in his late 30s stepped out, wearing hiking gear, a beard shadowing his jaw, eyes sharp and constantly scanning. Elias? Grace asked. He nodded. You're taller than I expected, she said. He smirked. You're exactly what I expected. Tired, but still running. Inside, they spread out maps and digital schematics. Elias laid it out. Arcadia's site is off the grid, masked by mineral rights leases and shielded with active signal jammers. The only way in is analog. No drones. No cell towers. We hike in. We hardwire breach the exterior, and I plug into their local relay system. From there, I ghost their security protocol, and we pull whatever proof we can. And if they catch us? Grace asked. Then we find out how real Iris is the hard way. They left that night, using a back route through Colorado, driving through winding mountain passes and empty two-lane highways that felt like they hadn't seen a soul in years. When they reached the base of the ridge near the Utah border, they ditched the SUV and continued on foot. 3 hours into the hike, the signal on Grace's devices died, jamming field. Elias nodded. "We're close." Under moonlight, the ridge looked empty. Just brush, rock, and shadow. But when they crested the final incline, Grace saw it, a ventilation array disguised as a geological feature. "That's it," Elias whispered. "Arcadia." They descended into darkness. Grace's heart pounded with every step as they moved through silence, the cold wind biting, the ground hard beneath them. They found the access hatch exactly where Ravi's coordinates said it would be. Elias popped it with a magnetic override tool and dropped inside. Grace followed. Inside was a tunnel, metal, cold, humming faintly with energy. They crept forward until they reached a small maintenance terminal. Elias cracked the panel, jacked in his custom line, and began typing. "I'm in. Downloading the mainframe shadow now. 3 minutes." Grace kept watch, pulse thudding in her ears. 2 minutes. 1. "Got it. Let's go," but just then, the corridor lights shifted. From pale blue to urgent red. "They know," Elias said. "Move." They ran. Back through the shaft, up through the hatch, sprinting across the rocky terrain. From behind them, drones emerged, silent, sleek, scanning with beams of pulsing light. "Don't stop," Elias shouted. "They'll jam our signals if we get too close to the edge of the field." They ran for half a mile, lungs burning, until the signal bars flickered back to life. Elias pulled out a SAT uplink and transmitted the data. "Sending it to Sam. And Wexler. And every outlet we can." Grace collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. "What did we get?" Elias checked his screen, face tightening. "Protocols. Neural profiles. Behavioral edits labeled Iris Alpha. They're not testing anymore. They're prepping for rollout. They're calling it Generation 2. Grace looked up at the stars, her body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. "Then we just bought the world one more breath before it forgets what thinking feels like." The world didn't stop when the Iris leak dropped, it ignited. Within hours of the upload, the files obtained from the Arcadia site were mirrored on servers across 6 continents. Digital rights groups called it the Neuroleak. News anchors struggled to explain what it meant for the average person, while psychologists, ethicists, and tech CEOs were pulled into emergency panels. One fact cut through the noise: Iris wasn't science fiction anymore, it was real, functional, and far more invasive than anything Helix had ever been. Iris wasn't wearable. It was permanent. Unlike Helix bands that could be removed, the Iris neural patch, once injected, couldn't be undone without neurosurgery. Its firmware was designed to evolve based on user responses, integrating with the limbic system and regulating the neurotransmitter pathways that determined emotion, memory, and even desire. One former Arcadia engineer went public just 2 days after the leak, face obscured, voice altered. "It doesn't tell you what to think," he said, "but it makes you comfortable with what someone else wants you to believe. It turns discomfort into compliance." The consequences rippled fast. Protests surged again, bigger, more organized, louder. Grace watched on a secure line as marches broke out in New York, Chicago, Seattle, and even abroad in London, Berlin, and Sydney. Protesters wore mock Helix bands made of duct tape, holding signs that said, "Free your mind," and "NOTO Neurotyranny." In Los Angeles, a tech collective known as Synaptic breached a Helix demonstration clinic and dumped all client data online, revealing thousands of test users, celebrities, politicians, influencers, all part of a quiet wave of first adopters. The list included senators, judges, even 3 cable news executives. The integrity of the entire media ecosystem was called into question overnight. Grace was back in Vermont, sitting beside Elias, watching the world unravel in real time. "We thought we had time," she said, voice low. "We thought if we caught them early, we could stop it before it got too far." Elias didn't look away from the screen. It was already too far. We were just the first ones to see it. Then came Musk's response. A full-length video. Not a tweet. Not a quote in a press release. This was a digital manifesto, nearly 20 minutes long, distributed simultaneously across every Tesla dashboard, every X user's feed, every Neuralink-enabled interface. "You've been lied to," he began. "Not by me. By fear. By those who think change should come slow, who think evolution must ask permission from the past. Iris is not control. It's choice. The choice to overcome our biological limits. The choice to remove rage, addiction, depression, indecision. These things are not sacred. They're errors. Bugs in the code. Iris is not an implant. It's an upgrade. And if some people fear a world with fewer monsters in our heads, that's their burden, not ours. The future will not wait for the fearful." It was masterful. Smooth, visionary, and dangerous. It framed compliance as courage and dissent as cowardice. Overnight, the hashtag #IChooseIris tag began trending. Supporters called themselves the Upgraded. Grace watched the trend surge and said, "He's turned truth into an aesthetic. You don't even have to agree with him, you just have to want to look like you do." Elias turned to her. "Then we need someone who can make the truth look better than the lie." That night, they met with Wexler again, this time in a private video link from an undisclosed Capital subnetwork. Wexler looked exhausted, but her resolve was clear. "We're losing the optics war," she said. "Your leak changed the conversation, but Musk just reframed it again. People don't care about autonomy. They care about comfort. And he's offering that, in unlimited supply." Grace nodded. "Then we need to go further. We don't just expose the system, we show what it feels like to lose yourself in it. We need a first-person account." Elias leaned forward. "We use one of the Iris test subjects." Wexler frowned. "They're sealed. NDA'd. Paid off. If they even remember they were changed." Grace shook her head. "There's one. Ravi mentioned Subject 0, the control case. They never fully integrated the patch. It was reversible. It was for comparison testing. If we can find them," Wexler blinked. "That's a hell of a long shot." Grace stared directly at the screen. "It's the only one we've got." The next 48 hours were a blur of data mining, location tracing, and deep system recon. Elias cracked into Arcadia's archived files, cross-referenced logistic shipments and medical supply chains, and finally landed on a candidate, Lila Montgomery, age 29, former military contractor turned Helix wellness volunteer. No record of her in any Helix press releases, but her medical history aligned perfectly with the prototype logs. She lived in a secure development outside Flagstaff, Arizona, gated, remote, but reachable. Grace didn't wait. She left that night. The drive took 2 days. Every mile felt heavier. The world was splintering. News cycles spinning out of control, factions forming online, a cultural schism growing between the upgraded and the undecided. By the time Grace arrived in Arizona, she knew the urgency was no longer theoretical. She was in a race against momentum. Lila's development was pristine and eerily quiet. Grace parked her rental outside the visitor gate and walked the rest of the way, passing synthetic lawns and solar panels that gleamed like mirrors. When she reached the right address, she knocked 3 times. The door opened a crack. A woman stood there, thin, sharp-eyed, cautious. "Yes. Lila Montgomery?" Grace said. "My name is Grace Martin. I'm a journalist. I believe you were part of the Iris trials. The woman froze. Her eyes didn't widen. Her jaw didn't drop. She just exhaled, slowly, like a balloon losing air. You should not be here, she whispered. Grace stepped closer. You're the only one who might remember what it felt like to be inside it. The real version. Not the marketing. Not the pitch. The experience. Lila looked past her, scanning the street. Then she opened the door. You've got 5 minutes. Inside, the house was sparse, minimalist furniture, no personal decorations. A single photo frame sat face down on a table. Lila sat on the edge of a gray couch. You want to know what it felt like? She asked. Imagine your worst memory. Then imagine it vanishing. Just, gone. And not in a traumatic way, just softly muted. Then your doubts fade. Then your fears. Then your need for questions. It doesn't erase you. It simplifies you. You become aligned with everything. But it's not peace. It's absence. It's emptiness wearing a smile. Grace leaned in. And you got out? Lila nodded. My patch rejected. They didn't tell me why. Just pulled me out of the trial. Said I wasn't compatible. For months I felt like a ghost. Couldn't connect. Couldn't cry. Took weeks before I could feel like myself again. Do you still have the medical record? I kept it all. Just in case. Guess this is the case. She handed Grace a thumb drive. That's everything. But once you release it, they'll come for you harder than ever. Grace looked at the drive, her hand trembling slightly. Let them come. I want them to know I'm still awake. She drove back through the night, her mind racing. When she arrived in Vermont, she and Elias reviewed the files. Proof of the emotional dampening. Logs of test responses. Video recordings of Lila's sessions. Her smile frozen, her tone flat, her agreement robotic. They uploaded the story the next morning. I was inside Iris, the testimony of a mind that almost forgot itself. It shattered the internet. It wasn't just tech news anymore. It was human news. Parents wept on camera. Soldiers spoke out. Even former Helix engineers began stepping forward. One viral comment said, if peace means forgetting who I am, I choose the chaos. Grace sat back as the world finally seemed to tip. Not all at once. Not in a clean, final victory. But in flickers, people waking up, shaking off the fog. And for the first time since this all began, she believed it might not be too late. By the time the video of Lila Montgomery's testimony reached its third day online, the ripple effect had evolved into a full-blown shockwave. The media could no longer spin it as mere, technological innovation with ethical concerns. They were now forced to call it what it was, neurological manipulation. Lawmakers scrambled, hosting emergency joint committee hearings while cable anchors tried to keep pace with a public that had finally begun asking the questions Grace had hoped they would from the start. What else don't we know? Who signed off on this? What about the others who were tested on? And most urgently, how do we make sure it stops? But for every outrage and every new headline, there was a counterforce, a surge of content from upgraded influencers. Dozens of accounts that had never previously discussed neural tech were now confidently defending Iris as the next logical step for humanity. The mind is a machine. We maintain our bodies, why not our thoughts, said one. There's no freedom in fear, said another, lips curled in digital righteousness. The comments below were equally split, thousands praising Iris for reducing anxiety, ending their depression, giving them purpose. But the testimonies didn't feel human. Grace saw it immediately. The patterns were too uniform, too clean. No typos. No contradictions. Always ending on the same hashtag, #OneMind. Elias noticed it too. He ran the user profiles through linguistic pattern detection software, and what they discovered chilled them both. Out of the top 500 pro-Iris comments analyzed across 12 major platforms, 78% originated from users who had either created their accounts in the last 6 months or had massive gaps in online history prior to this year. Their syntax was nearly identical: artificial, fabricated engagement. These aren't people, Elias muttered, staring at the code. They're synthetic personalities. AI-operated engagement farms. The language is guided by an emotional calibration system, similar to what Helix used in early emotion resonance training. Only now, it's automated. So we're not just fighting tech, Grace said quietly. We're fighting the illusion of consensus. The goal wasn't to convince everyone, just to make it look like everyone was already convinced. That subtle pressure to conform, to go with the flow, to be one of the smart ones, the ones ahead of the curve. That was how Iris would win. Not by dominating minds but by redefining what a sane mind even looked like. Wexler called that night. The president's watching, she said. Your last drop hit the situation room. But we need one more strike. Something undeniable. Something that will force a vote. A vote on what? Grace asked. On the Neurosovereignty Act. We've drafted it. It would place all neurological augmentation under federal oversight. Kill Arcadia's expansion. Prohibit permanent cognitive alteration without express, monitored, and revocable consent. They'll fight it, Grace said. Musk's lobbyists will pour a fortune into crushing it. Not if we give them a reason to fold. A reason the public can't unsee. What kind of reason? There was a pause on the line. Then Wexler said, there's a classified subcommittee investigating a case that was sealed last year. A federal judge in Ohio. Iris beta recipient. His decisions started shifting, favoring deregulation, dismissing tech liability cases, always leaning toward Musk-aligned entities. It looked like a coincidence. Until he ruled on a civil liberties case and cited an argument pulled word for word from Helix firmware documentation. We think Iris influenced his jurisprudence. We think it was tested on him without proper oversight. Grace swallowed hard. Can I see the file? You didn't hear it from me, Wexler said. Then she ended the call. Within an hour, Elias had cracked the hidden server where the case was stored. The file was buried under 5 layers of government shielding, signed off by a group called the Federal Biomedical Ethics Panel, operating under a temporary mandate during Helix's FDA fast-track era. What they found inside was staggering. Judge Ronald Weathers, a 57-year-old federal appointee with a 20-year record of centrist rulings, had undergone what was labeled a neural wellness integration trial in early 2024, disguised as a chronic pain intervention program. In reality, it was a covert Iris trial. Within 3 months, his language in court began to shift. He used phrases like, optimizing emotional labor, compliance is compassion, and the burden of too much choice. In one opinion, he ruled that a tech firm's use of behavioral reinforcement software did not constitute manipulation because, as he wrote, a peaceful citizenry is the logical product of aligned thought. That single phrase sent chills down Grace's spine. It sounded exactly like the words on Musk's Iris video. Grace made a decision that night. The world needed to see the face of someone altered by Iris making decisions on behalf of others. It needed to understand the stakes. She drafted the story, titled it, The Judge Who Forgot to Doubt, and built it around the court transcripts, the firmware citations, and medical logs. She included video of Weathers from before and after the injection, juxtaposing his once fiery, critical tone with the monotone, oddly serene demeanor of the man he had become. When it dropped, everything exploded. For the first time, the consequences weren't theoretical. The public could no longer imagine Iris as a helpful self-help upgrade. It had touched the courts. It had shaped the law. And now, people saw it for what it was, a system designed to insert preference into power. That night, a protest swelled outside the Capitol, tens of thousands carrying signs that read, "Free thought is law," and "Judge not, lest you be coded." In Silicon Valley, Arcadia's headquarters were swarmed by reporters. A spokesperson refused to comment. Musk, for the first time in months, deactivated his social accounts. By morning, Wexler called again. "The vote's happening," she said. "And you've got an invite." "To what?" Grace asked. "To testify. Again. Live. Prime time." Grace hesitated. "I don't know if I can do that again." "You have to. This time, it's not about shock. It's about drawing the line." Grace arrived in Washington that evening. Outside the building, helicopters hovered and camera crews swarmed the steps. Inside, the hearing room was packed wall to wall. Senators, aides, staffers, all of them waiting. When her name was called, she walked slowly to the witness table, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, hands trembling. But her voice was steady. "I've told you what Helix was. I've shown you what Iris is. Now I want to tell you what it means to fight for your own mind." She spoke of Lila, of Judge Weathers, of the illusion of calmness. She described what it felt like to know the world was sliding toward comfort over truth. And then she paused. Looked into the cameras. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The moment echoed. It was personal. It was vulnerable. And it cut through the politics like a scalpel. Afterward, the committee chair leaned into his mic. "Ms. Martin. In your view, what is the most dangerous thing about Iris?" She looked at him, eyes bright. "That you won't know it's changed you until you no longer care that it did." That night, the Neurosovereignty Act passed its preliminary vote by a narrow margin. The final vote would come in days. But Grace had done what she came to do. She had spoken the truth on the record. For everyone to see. And in that moment, she knew something had changed. Not everything. Not permanently. But the line had been drawn. Now, the question was whether the world would remember where it was. The morning after Grace's testimony, the world seemed to hold its breath. Cable news reran clips of her speech on a loop, influencers dissected her every word, and editorial writers across the country declared her the new face of the resistance against cognitive control. But for Grace, it wasn't about celebrity. It was about time. Borrowed time. The kind that always ran out just as the real danger began to surface. While the Neurosovereignty Act was inching closer to the final vote, Arcadia was accelerating its timeline. Wexler called with intel from an anonymous source within the Department of Defense. Arcadia had quietly secured a contract for what was being described as enhanced cognitive readiness among elite military personnel. In plain terms, it meant Iris was being tested on soldiers. Not volunteers. Active combat-ready soldiers. Grace's stomach turned as she stared at the classified brief. "They're skipping consent," she said. "They're calling it an operational imperative," Wexler replied grimly. "And it's not just Arcadia. We're talking about a new corporate military initiative. Quiet, fast, irreversible. The first rollout begins next week in Nevada." "How do we stop it?" Grace asked. "We leak it," Elias said from across the room. "Before they control the narrative. Before they can spin it as patriotic enhancement." Grace nodded. "We need a name. A face. Someone on the inside." That's when Elias mentioned Sergeant Devin Raines. Decorated Ranger. Stationed out of Fort White, Nevada. Been inside the Iris pre-trial conditioning loop since February. His behavioral logs were uploaded to Arcadia's cloud twice a week until last Friday, then they stopped. Why? My guess. He resisted. They had less than 72 hours to find him. Using a forged military contractor badge and a repurposed biometric ID tag scavenged from Elias's old contacts, Grace gained access to Fort White under the guise of a visiting neural performance auditor. She was escorted by 2 uniformed guards who eyed her badge skeptically but didn't question her paperwork. The base was silent. Too silent. Something about the way people walked, the way they looked straight ahead with flat expressions and clipped tones, it felt like being in a hive, not a base. She was led to the operations wing where she asked to review recent IR training logs. The guards hesitated, then granted her a 10-minute window alone with the system. Elias had equipped her with a wireless bridge tool, a microadapter that hijacked the terminal's USB port and synced it to his tablet in the van outside the base perimeter. As soon as she plugged in, Elias went to work. "I've got logs. Pulling video now. Wait, there's a redacted file. Looks recent." On the screen, Grace saw it, Devin Raines. Face bruised. Sitting in a white room, hands bound. A voice off-camera spoke calmly, too calmly. "Sergeant, you've experienced cognitive misalignment. The IRIS protocol will stabilize your threat assessments. Do you consent to resynchronization?" Devin's voice, ragged, "You took my instincts. I didn't hesitate when that boy ran out. You made me trust the numbers. That's not judgment. That's programming." The off-camera voice, "Your trauma response is inefficient. We're repairing it. Devin, you're killing who I was." The file cut out. Elias's voice crackled in her earpiece. "They're reprogramming soldiers in real time." Grace swallowed the bile rising in her throat. "Download everything. We have to get this out now." But just as she turned to unplug the adapter, the terminal locked. An alarm flared. The guards outside burst through the door. "Step away from the system," one barked. Grace raised her hands slowly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, you're not authorized. Hands behind your head." She complied, heart hammering, praying Elias got the files out before the signal was cut. She was escorted to a detainment chamber on the far side of the base, stripped of her ID, her comms, everything. Inside the cell, hours passed. No questions. No explanations. Just silence. Until the door opened again. A man in a tailored suit entered. Private contractor badge. No insignia. No rank. "Ms. Martin," he said. "I'm here to discuss your options." She stared at him. "Do I get a lawyer?" "You're not under arrest," he replied. "But you are in violation of several non-disclosure protections related to defense cognitive infrastructure. If you walk away now, quietly, we can seal this. You'll be monitored, of course. But safe. And if I don't? Then we make you irrelevant. Discredit your work. Show the world a different version of you. One that doubts herself. One that forgets why she ever started this." Grace looked him in the eye. "You're already doing that to soldiers. How long before you do it to every citizen?" He didn't flinch. "That depends on you." She was released 6 hours later with no explanation. Just a warning glare and a packet containing a non-disclosure agreement she never signed. When she got back to the van, Elias was gone. The laptop was smashed. But a burner phone sat on the driver's seat with a single message: "Meet me in Colorado. Safe House Echo. Bring nothing electronic." She drove through the night. Dirt roads. Back highways. Each mile pressing down on her like lead. When she arrived, Elias opened the door with bloodshot eyes and a broken smile. "I got out just in time," he said. "But they're on us now. All the way." "Did you save the files?" she asked. He nodded. "They're not just testing IRIS on soldiers. They're rewriting mission responses. Artificial empathy suppression. Field obedience protocols. They're creating emotional latency, delaying reactions long enough to reduce hesitation. But the side effect? Disassociation. They're turning trauma into software. Grace sat down, numb. We have to show the world. Not just the files. The people. Devon. If he's still alive. They spent the next 12 hours tracing military hospital intake logs, encrypted medevac routing data, and unlisted airlift flight paths. Finally, a hit. A remote psychiatric facility in southern Idaho. Off-grid. Not even listed under DoD jurisdiction. Grace went alone. Disguised as a field therapist with Department of Veterans Affairs clearance. She was taken through 3 levels of security and into a quiet, padded room where a man sat staring out a small window. He turned as she entered. Devon Rains. His eyes were cloudy. Not broken, just still. She sat beside him. Devon. My name is Grace. I know what they did to you. I want to help tell your story. He didn't respond at first. Then slowly, he said, they said my instincts were wrong. That they made people die. But now I don't feel anything. Not fear. Not anger. Not love. Just calm. She reached into her coat, pulled out a printed photo, of him in uniform, grinning beside his squad mates. Do you remember them? He stared. A long time. Then blinked. Yeah, he whispered. We were alive then. Grace nodded. You still are. But they want to take the part of you that remembers why you fight. Why you feel. Will you help me stop them? Devon looked at her, a single tear slipping down his cheek. I'll try. That night, they recorded his story. His voice shaky, uncertain, but raw. Honest. When the video went live, titled The Soldier Who Was Programmed to Forget, it shattered every illusion Musk had tried to build. Iris wasn't peace. It was anesthesia. And people were waking up to the numbness. For the first time, Grace believed the vote would go their way. But with every step forward, the threat loomed larger. The final battle was coming. And it wouldn't be fought in labs or courtrooms. It would be fought in the minds of the people deciding what kind of world they wanted to wake up in. The morning Devon's video went live, the internet fractured. Not broke, fractured. As in the clear splitting of one worldview from another. On one side were those who saw the footage for what it was, the unraveling of a man who had once been a hero, now hollowed out by a piece of technology he never fully consented to. On the other side stood the faithful, the upgraded, claiming the video was a deep fake, another piece of manufactured outrage by the fearmongers trying to slow progress. Grace watched the comment sections like someone watching a fault line stretch under their feet. And then the threat started. Direct messages, emails, even letters delivered to places she hadn't visited in years. You've been marked, Elias said, scanning the newest batch. Some are bots. But some are definitely real people. They think you're standing in the way of evolution. Grace looked down at the kitchen table, littered with printed comments. One read, "You're what's broken in the old world. Iris fixes people like you." Another, "Iris doesn't erase you. It upgrades the parts you don't need." She shivered. The language mirrored the firmware. Emotionally aligned speech designed to appear calm while bypassing moral argument entirely. It wasn't debate. It was conditioning. Just before noon, Wexler called. They've moved the vote up. 48 hours from now. They're scared your video will hit critical mass. Is it enough? Grace asked. Devon's testimony. It's enough for the middle. For the ones who haven't picked a side. But we need one more strike. Something that shows the depth of how far this goes. If we had proof Iris was in the government already, we do, Elias said, tapping his laptop. We found something else buried in the metadata from Arcadia's server farm. They ran trials in closed-loop environments, micro-cities. Simulation blocks. But the weird part is, the residents didn't know. They weren't volunteers. They were relocated under disaster recovery efforts. Flood zones, fire evacuations. Rehoused. And inside their new, smart communities, they were all unknowingly exposed to passive iris integration, through streetlights, ambient sound arrays, localized 5G emissions. Indirect synchronization. Grace's eyes widened. They turned whole towns into test labs. There's one left still running. It's called Grafton Ridge. Population 12,000. Nestled outside Sacramento. Entire grid powered by Tesla solar modules and operated by Arcadia's Civic Harmony AI. Have there been complaints? None. That's the point. It's too quiet. Everyone reports 90% satisfaction in quarterly metrics. But in 16 months, not a single public protest, letter to the editor, or school board objection. That's statistically impossible. Grace stared at the screen. They didn't just hack minds. They hacked behavior. At scale. They booked 2 tickets to California that night, flying under aliases, keeping their gear analog to avoid detection. By the time they reached Grafton Ridge, the sun was rising over perfect streets, manicured lawns, and rows of identical pastel houses. It looked like a postcard. It felt like a graveyard. They checked into a hotel under assumed names and began interviewing residents. Every conversation followed the same strange rhythm, pleasant greetings, perfectly balanced responses, no real complaints. Not one person used slang. Not one child misbehaved. Not a single driver honked or sped through a yellow light. Grace whispered to Elias, "It's not just eerie. It's sterile." He nodded. Too much harmony is just control wearing a polite face. They needed a break in the pattern. Someone who hadn't fully synced. That's when they found Jody Alvarez. Age 17. High school senior. Artist. She had slipped a note into Grace's hand during a staged canvassing interview, pretending to offer feedback on a survey. The note said, "Meet me under the old bridge at 11. Don't tell anyone. Don't bring phones." They arrived early. Jody was already there, pacing. She looked nervous, her eyes darting like she expected the trees themselves to be listening. "I know what they're doing," she said. "Everyone keeps saying how happy they are, how safe everything feels. But nobody dreams anymore. Nobody cries at movies. And nobody fights. Not even over dumb stuff. I painted something sad last week, and my teacher reported it as emotional nonconformity. My mom made me talk to a guidance counselor who told me to spend more time under the harmony trees. Said the tones would help me feel better." "The harmony trees?" Elias asked. "They're the big metal things in the park that play music all day. Soft little notes that change depending on how many people are nearby. But sometimes I swear I hear words in them. Not real words, just thoughts. Urges. Like someone whispering just out of earshot." Grace leaned in. "Have you ever left town?" Jody shook her head. "Nobody does. They say the traffic's always bad. Or that the air quality's worse out there. Or that there's too much noise. Everyone's always just as happy staying local. Would you talk to us on camera?" "Not here. They'll know. They always know. But I'll give you something." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a flash drive. "I snuck into my mom's Harmony account. She's on the neighborhood board. I copied the last 6 months of behavioral compliance logs." They took the drive and got out fast. Back in the hotel, Elias cracked the files. What they saw made Grace's blood run cold. The logs didn't just track moods, they recorded deviations. Instances of private emotional dissonance detected through ambient biometric sensors. Instances of subjects experiencing dreams that didn't match Arcadia's emotional alignment profiles. Flagged moments of sadness, jealousy, grief. Each marked as a harmony anomaly. Responses were automated: exposure to corrective sound waves, exposure to affirmational messaging via smart speakers, even minor HVAC chemical mood stabilizers. They're not just muting emotion, Elias said. They're preemptively detecting it. Grace whispered, pre-crime for the soul. They compiled the data into a single video: Welcome to Grafton Ridge, the town where nobody feels. They overlaid Jody's anonymous voice with scenes of empty parks, identical homes, and the harmony trees humming in the breeze. They ended it with one of the logs: Subject 246, experienced an unapproved sadness event after watching archived footage of grandmother. Response: scent therapy and passive dopamine pulse administered. Subject now compliant. The video dropped the next day. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 80 million times. People couldn't look away. The idea that a peaceful community could be a cage made of music and light hit something primal. For the first time, parents began asking, what if this comes to my town? And that fear wasn't hypothetical. It was immediate. That same night, Arcadia held an emergency press conference. A VP of development tried to claim the Grafton Ridge system was merely a pilot wellness model, and all participation was voluntary via community charter. But the damage was done. Senators who had wavered on the Neurosovereignty Act now faced calls from constituents. The final vote was rescheduled for 48 hours later. Grace sat in the safe house, staring at the screen, watching the countdown on a news ticker. "We're so close," she said. "But Musk hasn't said a word. Not since the Devon video. That scares me." Elias nodded. "He's not gone. He's just recalculating. He'll wait until the last moment. That's how he plays." Grace didn't sleep that night. When the final day came, she and Elias walked into the Capitol together. She carried no notes. No screens. Just conviction. As the committee assembled, and the country watched live, she stepped up to the mic one final time. "You've seen the data. You've heard the stories. Now I ask you, what is freedom worth to you? Not just freedom of speech, or movement, but freedom of feeling. The freedom to be sad. To doubt. To question. If we erase those things for comfort, we don't become more human, we become programmable. This vote isn't about stopping technology. It's about making sure it remembers what it means to be alive." The room held its breath. And somewhere in the silence, something shifted. The world, for a moment, remembered itself. The vote passed. By a margin so narrow it left the room stunned, 51 to 49 in favor of the Neurosovereignty Act. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the sound of shuffling papers and the nervous cough of a junior senator in the back row. Then came the eruption outside. Reporters shouted questions, protesters screamed, and crowds waiting beyond the barricades cheered as the news scrolled across every screen in America. Grace didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just closed her eyes and took the first full breath she'd allowed herself in weeks. But even as relief settled into her bones, the sense of finality didn't. This wasn't over. It never was. She looked at Elias, who stood quietly beside her, hands clenched into trembling fists. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," he said. Musk didn't lose. He just got slowed down. That night, Grace received an unmarked envelope at the safe house. No return address. No markings. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it were just 3 words: "You passed phase 1." She stared at the page for a long time, then flipped it over. Nothing. "This isn't over," she whispered. Elias took the paper, scanned it under ultraviolet light, and revealed a faint line of code near the bottom right edge, iris_v2/prnt_beta, Q3.25.25. They weren't retreating. They were iterating. Version 2 was already in the works. "It's not just Musk," Elias said. "There's an entire infrastructure now. Iris isn't a product, it's a philosophy. And philosophies don't die when laws pass. They just go underground." The weeks following the vote were a blur. Grace appeared on every major news outlet, testifying before state assemblies, partnering with watchdog groups to ensure compliance with the act. For a while, things felt like they might actually hold. But then, reports began surfacing. Subtle at first, strange behavioral shifts in children at certain charter schools funded by Arcadia grants. Sudden changes in emotional regulation after exposure to updated learning software. Spikes in docility. Drops in creative output. Grace traced the pattern to a pilot program called BrightMind, pitched as an emotionally adaptive learning tool for schools in underserved districts. It wasn't Iris, but it was built on the same architecture. "This is how they'll do it," she said to Wexler on a late-night call. "They'll fragment it. Rename it. Spread it through innocuous programs until the core is everywhere and invisible. And we can't legislate fast enough to stop it," Wexler said. "They'll always be a step ahead. Unless we go to the source." Wexler hesitated. "You mean Musk?" "I mean Arcadia's mainframe. If we can expose the blueprints for V2, it won't matter how many names they hide behind. We burn the foundation." Getting inside Arcadia's core development center wasn't just difficult, it was suicidal. Located in a remote, heavily fortified tech compound outside Elko, Nevada, the Arcadia core operated as a sovereign campus with biometric access controls, round-the-clock drone surveillance, and a private security team made up of former special operations contractors. But Elias had a plan. "There's one door they never lock," he said. "The one for their own ambition. Arcadia is planning a demo for investors. An underground preview of Iris V2. A Proof of Liberty event. They'll be flying in potential international partners, showing them the next-generation interface. If we can swap credentials with one of those attendees and access the server through the presentation terminal, I can extract the entire firmware package and the source algorithm." Grace raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we impersonate a billionaire from Singapore?" "We don't," Elias said with a grin. "But someone else already did." He revealed a dossier on a man named Kai Lo, a rogue crypto magnate who had recently disappeared en route to a Tesla investor retreat. "We're going to take his place. His ID is already in the system. Nobody's seen his face in months. His rep was handled by a digital proxy. We slip in under his name, play the part, and steal the future." Grace's stomach twisted at the thought. It wasn't just dangerous, it was betrayal on a level she hadn't attempted since Helix. But this time, the betrayal was righteous. This time, it was war. They flew into Nevada under cover of night, their fake IDs scanned at a private airstrip outside Reno. A driver met them at the tarmac, escorted them into a sleek black vehicle with no license plate. The road was long, barren, and silent. When they arrived at Arcadia Core, it was like entering another planet. The complex shimmered in a polished chrome shell, dotted with biometric trees that analyzed everyone passing by. The architecture wasn't just futuristic, it was ego-given form. Inside, everything pulsed with soft, programmable light. Investor attendees were handed wearable bands that adapted to their neural feedback in real time. "Welcome, Mr. Lowe," said a pristine AI hostess as Grace and Elias entered. "We've prepared your cognitive alignment chamber. Your preferences have already been imported from your digital twin." "Perfect," Grace said with a smile, playing the part. "We'll just take a moment to settle in." Once in their room, Elias began scanning for access points. There, he pointed. Presentation room B, one floor above. That's where the live demo will run. I'll go in with the hardware dongle. You cover the exit. Grace nodded, her heart pounding. How long will it take? If the firewall behaves, 4 minutes. If not, I'll improvise. They moved quickly, dodging cameras, using stolen security loops Elias had embedded hours earlier into the feed. Inside the demo room, a dozen VIPs sat watching a soft-spoken presenter walk them through Iris V2's interface. Grace slipped into the observation booth while Elias moved to the presenter's terminal. Version 2 doesn't just read emotion, the presenter said. It predicts. It interprets. It advises. It knows the difference between impulse and truth. It doesn't just help you decide, it helps you want what's best for yourself. Grace felt sick. It was elegant. Frightening. Elias inserted the dongle, hands shaking slightly. I'm in, he whispered. 3 minutes. The code streamed across the screen, lines of emotional alignment scripting, identity override protocols, and a terrifying new function called SympathLock. Grace read the file. Engage SympathLock to stabilize group response coherence in high-stress situations. Override individual variance. Optimize emotional contagion for desired outcome. They weren't just upgrading minds. They were programming mass reaction. If one person panicked, the rest would be forced to calm them through induced empathy. No resistance. Just shared docility. Suddenly, the screen flashed red. Alert, unauthorized extraction detected. Security breach in progress. Move. Elias shouted, yanking the dongle and sprinting toward the side exit. Alarms blared as armed guards descended. Grace ran, ducking through emergency corridors as sirens drowned out her heartbeat. They burst through a fire door, down a maintenance shaft, and out into the Nevada night, their lungs burning and adrenaline screaming. They made it back to the airstrip with seconds to spare, boarding a pre-rigged drone transport linked to a nearby safe house. Only when the door locked behind them did Grace allow herself to breathe. Did we get it? She asked. Elias grinned, pulling the drive from his coat. Every line. The next day, they uploaded the entire source package to a coalition of trusted technologists, whistleblower platforms, and journalists across the globe. The headline read, Iris V2, the code to rewrite humanity. The world saw everything. The mass behavioral locks. The predictive thought analysis. The emotional override commands. It was no longer about theory or risk, it was about intent. Arcadia's stock plummeted. Musk re-emerged briefly to claim the data was out of context, but it didn't matter. The code spoke for itself. Governments launched investigations. Citizens demanded audits. And for the first time in years, the concept of consent wasn't just legal jargon, it was sacred. Grace stood in the middle of her safe house, watching the footage play on loop, and let herself cry for the first time since it all began. Because while the war wasn't over, the truth had finally outrun the silence. Grace knew the silence wouldn't last. The shockwave from the Iris V2 leak rippled across industries, governments, and civil societies like a global tremor, exposing how deep Arcadia's influence had already burrowed into infrastructure most people assumed was apolitical. School boards, healthcare apps, digital assistants embedded in smart homes. The backlash was immediate and unpredictable. In San Francisco, protesters chained themselves to harmony trees, demanding they be torn out of public parks. In Boston, a group of teachers staged a walkout, refusing to use BrightMind lesson plans linked to passive emotional feedback monitoring. But what alarmed Grace the most were the people defending it. Thought leaders from Silicon Valley appeared on talk shows and podcasts, praising Iris for preventing emotional extremism, for curating safer cognitive landscapes, for redefining productivity through neurostability. They weren't hiding. They were reframing. A new narrative was forming, one where opposition to Iris was painted as dangerous regression, where emotional volatility was treated as a public health risk. Elias called it the compliance cult. Grace called it desperation. Either way, they both knew one thing: Musk wasn't done. He was silent, yes, but in the way a storm goes quiet before it hits. And then came the first ripple. An anonymous leak dropped onto a decentralized forum known only to insiders. It was a video, timestamped 2 days prior, from inside a private Arcadia lab in Finland. The footage showed engineers watching a bank of monitors filled with biometric data streams. In the center of the screen, a new term appeared: Iris Atlas. Grace's blood turned cold. "He's globalizing it," Elias said, scanning the metadata. Iris Atlas is a worldwide cognitive mapping protocol. They've already collected baseline data from over 200 million users across 6 continents through indirect interface apps, fitness bands, e-learning tools, even meditation programs. "What's the endgame?" Grace asked, already afraid of the answer. "They're building a global mood map," Elias replied. "An emotional climate system. One that lets them predict unrest, emotional contagion, even potential uprisings. And once they've mapped enough of it, they'll be able to steer it," Grace finished. The implications were staggering. Democracy built on emotion could be rewritten in real time. Markets could be crashed or inflated based on mass effective response. Leaders could be elevated or destroyed based not on policy, but on the projected outcome of how they made people feel. Grace sat down, staring at the screen as the lines of code scrolled endlessly. "We need someone on the inside," she said. "Someone who helped build Atlas." It took days of encrypted messages, dead drops, and triangulated IP routing, but eventually a signal came through. A woman named Leah Harvick. Former lead cognitive architect at Arcadia's Nordic lab. Disappeared 8 months ago after what Arcadia called a contract dissolution. Leah hadn't vanished. She'd gone underground. Grace met her in a snowy forest outside Uppsala, Sweden. No cameras. No electronics. Just a single bench beneath a pine canopy and a woman wrapped in thermal gear, her eyes sharp and haunted. "I left when I realized we weren't mapping moods," Leah said. "We were building feedback loops, emotional mirrors that reflected the projected state we wanted people to believe they were in. It wasn't enough to know people were anxious or sad or defiant. We started nudging those emotions downward. Quieting them. Smothering them. And not with software anymore." Grace narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" "They're developing neuroreactive biodust. Nanoparticles. Released through HVAC systems, smart fragrance dispensers, even wearable tech coatings. They activate when the system detects deviation from target mood zones. So if someone gets angry, a cooling agent. If someone grieves, a mild serotonin stimulant. And if someone starts asking the wrong questions, they're sedated," Grace whispered. "Voluntarily. Invisibly. Without ever knowing why." Leah nodded. "Atlas isn't a map. It's a thermostat. And they're setting the emotional climate for the entire world." Grace left Sweden with a drive containing the research protocols and early test data. Back in the States, Elias built a simulator to visualize what a fully operational Atlas network would look like. The screen lit up with digital overlays, clusters of cities color-coded by emotional consensus, red zones blinking in areas of high resistance, soft blues glowing in places where mood compliance was at 90% or higher. "It looks like weather," Grace said. "But it's people." And once they flip the final switch, Elias added, it will predict everything from political outcomes to consumer behavior. It's not surveillance. It's behavioral currency. They launched a new campaign, this time with global partners, activists from Germany, coders from Brazil, journalists from Korea. The new documentary, Atlas, The World You're Meant to Feel, dropped 3 weeks later and exploded into international consciousness. The footage of Lee's confession, paired with simulated emotion maps and the revelation of biodust testing in public retail spaces, caused mass panic. Lawsuits hit Arcadia from every direction. International regulators launched probes. But amidst the chaos, a new worry emerged. People began turning on each other. In London, protesters demanded everyone throw away their smart devices. In Toronto, a riot broke out outside a school rumored to be using BrightMind 2.0. Families accused each other of being emotionally compromised. A rumor spread that even digital assistants like Harmony Pods were nudging moods based on conversations overheard at night. It wasn't just about Arcadia anymore. It was about trust. And that was the final lever Musk had waited for. Just as the chaos peaked, Elon Musk made his return. A live-streamed address titled, "The Next Evolution." It opened with him standing in front of a dark screen. What if we could end war, not with treaties, but with empathy, he asked. What if we could solve conflict, not by silencing dissent, but by soothing the parts of us that scream in pain? Behind him, the screen flickered to life. A globe rotated, lit with thousands of glowing points. Iris wasn't the endgame, he continued. Atlas is. And with it, we can create a world without unnecessary suffering. A world where emotion is understood, not feared. Where people are seen. Guided. Loved. He paused. Then smiled. And yes. It's voluntary. The screen changed again, this time showing a single implant chip. Introducing Atlas Core. The first personal emotional firewall. One chip. One integration. And full cognitive autonomy. Grace stared at the screen in disbelief. He's flipping the narrative. He's turning it into a choice. An opt-in revolution. Elias gritted his teeth. He's learned. He's giving people the illusion of control now. The offer was simple: install the chip, receive access to Atlas's global consensus feed, block unwanted emotional manipulation, and upgrade your empathy by aligning with others in real time. Musk called it the world's first emotional immune system. Tens of millions signed up in the first week. Grace watched in horror as news anchors praised the integration, celebrities posted videos crying about how seen they finally felt, and entire cities offered incentives for early adopters. Atlas Core was marketed as freedom, freedom from anxiety, from fear, from misunderstanding. But Grace knew what it really was. The final key. Not to control people against their will. But to convince them to surrender it willingly. And that was the most terrifying innovation of all. Grace hadn't slept in days. The rise of Atlas Core was too fast, too coordinated, and too eerily accepted. She watched with growing dread as city after city rolled out Atlas access points in community centers, libraries, hospitals, anywhere people gathered and felt vulnerable. The pitch was always the same: better emotional wellness, improved understanding between citizens, an optimized society. But what disturbed her the most was how people described the chip after activation. "It's like hearing everyone's heart at once," said one influencer in a tearful video. "There's no more anger. I just feel aligned." Another, "The weight of life just lifted. I feel light, like my sadness isn't mine anymore. Like it was never real." It wasn't just emotional regulation. It was disassociation. A clean cut between the self and the feeling. The illusion of peace. Elias set up a new data crawler to map Atlas Core's adoption curve. "At this rate," he said, "half the US population will be chipped in under 4 months. And globally? We'll pass 1 billion in a year." Grace shook her head, trying to process the speed of it all. People aren't even questioning it anymore. They're welcoming it. Begging for it. Because he made the alternative seem like chaos, Elias said. He let the world drown in emotional distrust for just long enough, then offered a lifeline. People will always choose order when their lives feel like static. She looked at the map, whole swaths of color changing to soft blue as Atlas core expanded. And once enough people are chipped, resistance becomes harder to organize. Protests break apart before they begin. Doubt evaporates in the echo. It's not just control, Elias whispered. It's sedation of the soul. They had one option left. An unthinkable one. We have to disable Atlas core, Grace said. Permanently. That means taking down the beacon, Elias replied. The central pulse array. It's buried under the Mojave Test Range, in Arcadia's Deep Harmony complex. We hit that, the sync drops. Atlas loses its global update loop. The chips become dead circuits. How secure is it? Underground. Shielded. Remote-controlled security drones. No human guards. Fully automated defense protocol. What's our entry point? The maintenance rail. The entire base runs on a maglev system for materials and thermal exchange. There's a hatch 2 miles from the West Mesa. If we go in from there, I can reach the uplink chamber. And the failsafe? There's a hard switch. A manual breaker inside the harmony core. If I trip it, the resonance pulse stops. No more emotional sync. But once I touch that core, we'll be detected instantly. Then we make it count. They geared up using analog equipment, no digital trails, no wireless comms. Just signal flares, old-school lock picks, and printed blueprints Leah had smuggled out during her time with the Atlas design team. As they approached the desert in a beat-up truck camouflaged as a power repair vehicle, Grace felt something she hadn't in months, clarity. Not peace, not relief, but resolve. The kind that anchors itself to the spine and doesn't ask for permission. The hatch was right where Elias said it would be, buried beneath a rock outcropping and shielded by adaptive camouflage that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. They cracked it open with brute force and slipped inside the rail corridor, descending into the artificial wind tunnel that pulsed with quiet, ominous hums. For 20 minutes, they moved in silence, dodging surveillance sensors and scanning for anomalies. Finally, they reached the chamber. The harmony core wasn't beautiful. It wasn't even elegant. It looked like a nest of iron and light, a fusion of wires, fluid-filled tubes, and spinning gyroscopes all surrounding a single glass node suspended in a vertical chamber. From it pulsed a deep, rhythmic tone, a frequency Grace could feel in her teeth, in her bones, in the base of her skull. Elias stepped toward the console and began connecting his disruptor device, a custom-built loopback engine designed to intercept the resonance signal and inject an inverse frequency. Once I plug this in, he said, we'll have 90 seconds before the system recognizes the anomaly. Then we hit the switch, and we run. Grace nodded. Let's end this. He slid the final piece into place. The tone changed. Just slightly. A hitch. A crack in the rhythm. The core pulsed again, then began to flicker. Across the world, Atlas core users blinked in confusion. In New York, a woman on a subway suddenly felt the weight of sadness return, sharp and real. In Seoul, a man paused during meditation and realized he didn't want to be calm, he wanted answers. In Nairobi, a teenager pulled off her headset mid-session and whispered, I feel like me again. But inside the chamber, alarms screamed to life. Red lights spun across the ceiling as defense drones activated from hidden ports. They're here. Elias shouted. Now. Grace sprinted toward the breaker, a steel switch protected by a biometric gate. She slammed the emergency override panel, yanked free the casing, and pulled the lever with everything she had. The core screamed, literally. A piercing feedback tone echoed through the chamber, then fractured into silence. The lights dimmed. The pulse died. All over the world, Atlas core flatlined. The sync broke. The chips went silent. And in the stillness, humanity exhaled. But they weren't out yet. Grace grabbed Elias's hand, and they ran. Drones swarmed through the access tunnels, firing stun pulses and sonic disruptors. One blast grazed Grace's arm, sending searing pain through her shoulder, but she kept moving, dragging Elias with her. They burst out of the exit tunnel moments before the final gate sealed behind them. Above them, the stars shimmered in silence. No sync. No pulse. Just the beating of their own unaltered hearts. They drove for hours, disappearing into the edges of nowhere. The next day, news broke across every channel: global disruption of Atlas core, source unknown. Musk appeared later that week in a brief statement. The Atlas experiment, he said calmly, was a vision of peace. Some people weren't ready. But that doesn't mean the future stops. Grace watched the broadcast and knew it wasn't over. Musk wasn't done. But he was wounded. And now, the world had seen what the future looked like when feelings were programmed instead of lived. The tides were turning. People spoke in new ways. They questioned again. They cried, they argued, they laughed, and this time, it was real. The chaos returned, yes. But so did choice. And that, Grace knew, was the only revolution that ever mattered. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?